Spring had always been my favorite season, especially in my hometown of Willow's End, a small rural place tucked between endless fields and an ancient forest known as Blossom Woods. Every year, when the snow finally melted and the first pink blooms appeared on the trees, the town would come alive. People decorated their houses with pastel banners. There were potlucks and bonfires, and the woods, normally eerie in the winter months, would turn into a wonderland of flowers and sweet-smelling air. But for as long as I could remember, there had been a darker side to spring. Every few years, when the woods were at their most beautiful, someone would disappear, not in the middle of the night or during a storm. No, they would vanish on a clear, sunny day, usually during the spring festival, when the whole town gathered near the forest's edge to celebrate. It was almost a tradition, a secret everyone knew but no one spoke about. If you were smart, you stayed close to the crowd. If you were foolish or unlucky, you wandered too close to Blossom Woods and you never came back. I never believed in the old stories. Not really. I thought they were just tales to scare kids and keep teenagers from sneaking into the woods to drink or mess around. But last spring, everything changed. Last spring, I learned the truth. It started when my best friend Amy disappeared. One moment she was there beside me at the festival, laughing and eating cotton candy, and the next, she was gone. I thought she had wandered off to find the restroom or grab another drink. I wasn't worried at first. Why would I be? We were surrounded by hundreds of people, and it was barely mid-afternoon. The sun was shining, the air was warm, and music floated from the main stage. There was no reason to be afraid. I looked for her for hours. I asked around, checked the food stalls, the dance area, the games, even the parking lot. No one had seen her leave. No one had seen her at all. It was like she had simply ceased to exist. By the time the sun began to set and the vendors started packing up, I knew something was wrong. I called her phone over and over, each time getting her voicemail. Eventually, I flagged down one of the local deputies, an older guy named Sheriff Mallory, who had been running the department for longer than I had been alive. When I told him Amy was missing, he didn't look surprised. Concerned, sure, but not surprised. It was almost like he had been expecting it. "We'll put out an alert," he said, but there was something in his voice that made my blood run cold. Resignation, like he already knew it wouldn't help. The search went on for days. Volunteers combed the woods shouting her name, looking under every tree and in every hollow. But they didn't find anything. No broken branches, no footprints, no scraps of clothing. It was like she had been plucked out of existence. Her parents were devastated, of course, but over time even they seemed to accept it in that quiet, sorrowful way that people in Willow's End did. It was just something that happened, something that always happened. But I couldn't let it go. Amy wasn't just another name on a list, she was my best friend. We had made plans for college, talked about leaving this stupid little town and making something of ourselves. She wasn't supposed to just vanish. And so, late one night, about a week after the festival ended, I made a decision that everyone else had been too scared or too smart to make. I was going into Blossom Woods. I was going to find out what had happened to her. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. They would have tried to stop me, or worse, they would have looked at me with that same sad expression, the one that said, "You'll understand one day." I packed a small backpack with essentials, a flashlight, a pocket knife, water, and an old map of the woods I found tucked away in the town library. It was dated 1947 and practically falling apart at the seams, but it showed trails that had long since been forgotten, paths that weren't on any of the modern hiking guides. I figured if Amy had wandered off, maybe she had followed one of these old trails. I left just after midnight when the streets were empty and the world was silent. The woods loomed in the distance, a dark mass against the starlit sky. As I crossed the open field leading up to the tree line, I felt a shiver run through me. It was colder than it should have been for a spring night, and the air smelled different, damp, earthy, almost metallic. I tightened my jacket around myself and pressed. The first thing I noticed as I entered the woods was the quiet. It wasn't just the absence of people. It was the absence of everything. No birds, no insects, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. The trees loomed overhead, They're blossoming. Branches heavy with pale pink flowers that glowed faintly in the moonlight, almost ethereal. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like walking into a dream you couldn't wake up from, a dream that was about to turn into a nightmare. I followed one of the old trails, guided by the faint outlines on the map and the dim beam of my flashlight. The further I went, the stranger things became. The path twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense, looping back on itself, leading me in circles. At one point, I swore I saw someone standing among the trees just at the edge of my vision, a figure too tall, too still, watching me. But when I swung the flashlight toward it, there was nothing there, just empty woods. I don't know how long. I wandered. Hours, maybe. Time seemed different in Blossom Woods, stretched thin and brittle. I was about to turn back, my nerves fraying, when I found something that made my blood run cold. It was Amy's necklace, a small silver locket she wore every day lying in the dirt at the base of a massive gnarled tree. I snatched it up, my hands trembling. There was no doubt it was hers. I called her name, my voice echoing unnaturally through the trees. No response. I shouted again, louder this time. Still nothing. And then, just as I was about to give up, I heard it. A faint whisper carried on the breeze. "Help me!" I froze, straining to hear. It came again, clearer this time, from deeper in the woods. "Help me!" It was Amy's voice. I was sure of it. Without thinking, I took off running, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. The flashlight bounced wildly in my hand, casting crazy, jerky shadows. I didn't care. I had to find her. The voice led me deeper and deeper into the woods, far beyond any trail, into a part of the forest that felt wrong. The trees here were different, older, twisted into grotesque shapes. The air grew colder, thicker, until every breath felt like inhaling smoke. I stumbled into a clearing, and that's when I saw it. A stone well stood in the center of the clearing, ancient and crumbling, covered in moss and creeping vines. It looked completely out of place, like something ripped from a different time and dropped here by accident. The whispers were louder now, rising up from the darkness inside the well. "Help me!" I stepped closer, peering over the edge. The flashlight barely penetrated the gloom, but I thought I saw movement down there. Something shifting, something reaching. That's when a hand shot out of the darkness and grabbed my wrist. The hand clamped around my wrist was ice cold and impossibly strong, yanking me toward the edge of the crumbling well with such force that the stones beneath my feet shifted and groaned. And for a moment I thought I would topple in head first, vanishing into whatever abyss lay below. I screamed, struggling against the grip, trying to wrench myself free, but it was no use. The more I pulled, the tighter it became, as if the thing in the well was determined not just to capture me, but to drag me down into its suffocating darkness, to make me part of whatever nightmare festered at the bottom of that ancient pit. My flashlight tumbled from my hand, clattering against the stones and falling into the void. Its beam spinning wildly and illuminating, just for a second, the horror that gripped me. A hand, yes, but not Amy's, not even fully human, the E. Skin pale and swollen like something left too long underwater. The fingers too long. The nails cracked and blackened, and worse still, attached to an arm that disappeared into a mass of writhing, shifting bodies just below the surface. Dozens, maybe hundreds of tangled figures, eyes staring blindly, mouths silently screaming, all reaching up toward me. With a final desperate surge of strength, I tore myself free, stumbling backward and landing hard on the ground. My heart hammering so loudly, it drowned out the whispering voices that still spilled from the depths of the well. I scrambled to my feet and ran, branches tearing at my clothes and skin, not daring to look back, not even when I heard the soft patter of something wet and heavy pulling itself out of the well behind me, moving with a grotesque determination, its breathless whispers hissing through the woods like 1,000 dying leaves. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop, weaving blindly through the trees, following no path, just moving, needing to be away from that clearing, away from that thing. Somehow, against all odds, I burst from the tree line and into the open fields that bordered Willow's End, the lights of the town shining in the distance like a promise of safety, of normalcy. And it wasn't until I stumbled up to the first house and pounded frantically on the door that I realized tears were streaming down my face, my hands streaked with blood from countless cuts, Amy's locket still clenched so tightly in my fist that the edges had bitten into my palm. The sheriff came, of course, along with half the town, drawn by the commotion, and when they found me half mad with terror, babbling about hands and wells and voices, they didn't laugh or call me crazy. They just looked at each other with that same grim, sorrowful understanding, the same way they had after Amy vanished. And I understood finally what no one had ever dared to say out loud. The woods didn't just take people. They kept them, transformed them into part of whatever ancient malevolent force lived there, a force that demanded tribute every few years when the blossoms bloomed and the air grew thick with the smell of new life. Sheriff Mallory drove me home in silence that night, and just before he left, he put a heavy hand on my shoulder and said, "You're lucky you made it back, son. Next time, don't go looking for what you're not meant to find." And there was something in his voice that chilled me even more than the night in the woods. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that I moved away and left Willow's End and its cursed forest behind. But even now, even miles away in a bustling city, surrounded by concrete and glass, I sometimes catch a glimpse of something in the corner of a mirror, a flash of pink blossoms where there shouldn't be any. And at night, when the world is quiet and the wind rustles through the trees outside my window, I hear it. The faint, desperate whisper of my best friend's voice calling from somewhere far, far away, from a place I can never reach again. Help me. And I know, deep in my bones, that Blossom Woods hasn't finished with me yet. It had been raining for 12 days straight, and by the 13th the town of Greystone had begun to change. At first it was little things, puddles that didn't drain, the earth turning to a thick, sucking muck that swallowed boots up. To the ankle, the grey clouds so low and heavy that they seemed to press against the rooftops. But by the time the second week dragged on with no end in sight, it was clear that this wasn't just another stubborn spring storm. It was something worse, something wrong. And it all started, like most stories in Greystone, with the old creek bridge. The bridge had been there forever, a crumbling relic from a time when horses and wagons rattled down dirt roads, and over the years it had earned a reputation. Teenagers dared each other to walk across it at midnight. Older folks muttered prayers when they drove over it. And nobody went near it after dark if they could help it, because everyone knew the stories about the bridge, about how the town's founder, Elias Granger, had built it over sacred land, how he had angered something old and buried deep beneath the earth, and how every few decades the rains would return to remind Greystone of the debt it owed. I didn't believe any of that, of course, not when I was growing up. I thought it was just superstition, another creepy tale to spice up life in a town where nothing ever happened, until last spring, when I learned the truth the hard way. It was April when the rain started, a soft drizzle that fell like mist. At first, soaking into the earth and turning everything a deep, vibrant green. And for the first few days, nobody minded. Farmers were grateful, gardeners smiled, and kids stomped through puddles on their way to school. But as the days dragged on and the rain never let up, it began to wear on us. The ground grew saturated, then flooded until the park turned into a shallow lake, and the fields looked like endless swamps. And still the rain came, heavy and ceaseless, a constant drumming on rooftops that got into your head and made it impossible to think. By the 8th day, the basements were flooding. The river that ran beneath Old Creek Bridge was swollen and angry, and people started to get nervous. The town council called a meeting in the high school gymnasium, where everyone huddled together under leaking ceilings, while the mayor, a frazzled woman named Carla Brooks, tried to assure us that the state would send help soon, that the rain would break any day now, but nobody really believed her. We all remembered the stories, even if we pretended not to, and there was a feeling in the air, a cold, crawling dread that had nothing to do with the weather. It was around that time that the first body washed up. I was the one who found it, and I still wish every day that I hadn't. I was on my way home from work, sloshing through the muddy side streets with my hood pulled low against the rain, when I saw it. A shape snagged on the roots of a fallen tree near the riverbank, pale and bloated, bobbing gently in the current. For a second I thought it was a deer, or maybe someone's lost dog. But as I got closer, I saw the twisted limbs, the gaping mouth, the empty eye sockets, and the thing that made my stomach lurch. The ragged piece of red plaid shirt still, clinging to its chest, the same shirt I had seen old Mr. Halvers wearing just 3 days earlier at the gas station. They said he had wandered out during the night, disoriented by the rain, and drowned. But even then, even as I told myself that, I knew it wasn't true, because Mr. Halver's mouth wasn't just open in death, it was twisted into a frozen scream, and his hands were shredded with deep bloody gashes like he had been clawing at something with desperate, hopeless fury. After that, people started leaving, packing up their cars with whatever they could carry, and driving out of town while the roads were still passable. But a lot of them didn't make it. The main highway was already half flooded, and several cars were found abandoned along the shoulder, doors swinging open, no sign of the drivers. Some said they had gotten stuck and tried to walk for help, but others whispered about things moving in the rain, shapes glimpsed through the sheets of water. Not quite human, not quite anything. Really just wrong. The sheriff, a big bear of a man named Pete Duncan, tried to keep everyone calm, setting up sandbag barriers and organizing search parties. But every day more people vanished, and the rain just kept falling, heavier and heavier, until it felt like the whole world had sunk underwater. I stayed, mostly because I didn't have anywhere else to go, and partly because I needed to know what was happening. It didn't make sense. Rain, even heavy rain, didn't make people disappear, didn't tear up trees by the roots, didn't whisper in the dead of night with voices that sounded like people you loved but knew were long dead. But the worst thing, the thing that kept me awake at night, was the bridge. Because every time someone disappeared, someone swore they had seen them near Old Creek Bridge, standing motionless in the downpour, staring into the swollen black river as if something down there was calling to them. It wasn't until the 14th night that I decided to see for myself. I don't know what I was thinking, honestly. Maybe I wasn't thinking at all. Maybe the constant hammering of the rain had worn down my common sense. Or maybe it was something else. Something inside the rain, whispering to me the same way it had whispered to all the others. But either way, just before midnight I pulled on my heaviest coat, grabbed my flashlight, and set out toward Old Creek Bridge. The streets were empty, abandoned, the houses dark and silent, except for the rhythmic pounding of water on their roofs. The river roared. Somewhere ahead, a black snake winding through the town, and the closer I got to the bridge, the colder the air became, until my breath puffed out in white clouds and my fingers went numb inside my gloves. When I finally reached the bridge, I hesitated at the edge, shining my light across the crumbling planks slick with rain and moss. And that's when I saw him, a figure standing halfway across, back turned to me, soaked through, head bowed. I thought for one crazy second that it was Mr. Halvers, even though I knew it couldn't be. But when the figure slowly raised its head and looked back at me, I stumbled backward in horror, because the face that stared at me from beneath, the hood wasn't Mr. Halvers at all, it was me. For a second, I was frozen there at the mouth of the bridge, rain soaking through my coat, heart hammering so loudly it drowned out the roar of the river, and I just stared at the figure that wore my face. Not a reflection, not a trick of the light, but me standing halfway across the bridge, smiling with a slow, unnatural curl of the lips that didn't reach its dead, glassy eyes, and then it lifted its arm and pointed, first at me and then down toward the river below. And before I could even think, before I could force my feet to move, another figure emerged from the mist, and another, each one a grotesque imitation of someone from town, Mrs. Klein from the bakery, Sheriff Duncan, even little Maddie Wright, who had gone missing 2 nights ago. All of them waterlogged, slack-jawed, shuffling onto the bridge, surrounding me with their dripping forms. And suddenly the bridge wasn't empty anymore. It was a procession, a funeral march of drowned souls slowly, inevitably closing the distance between us. I stumbled back, slipping in the mud, gasping for air that felt thicker and colder with every breath, and when my back hit the rusted rail at the side of the bridge, I realized with dawning horror that there was nowhere left to go. The river surged below, black and hungry, and the rain fell in sheets so heavy that it blurred the world into a grey smear. But the figures kept coming, reaching out with hands bloated and wrinkled and clawed, mouths moving in silent words. Couldn't understand. And just when I thought they would grab me, pull me down among them, a crack of lightning split the sky, and for an instant everything was thrown into stark, blinding relief. The bridge, the river, and something beneath the surface, something vast and writhing and waiting, a mass of slick, pale shapes shifting. In the depths, their eyes glinting hungrily as they turned upward to meet me. The bridge groaned under the weight of the gathering dead, the old timbers creaking and snapping, and I knew, somehow I knew, that if I stayed there 1 second longer, it would collapse, taking me down with it into that writhing nightmare below. I turned and ran, forcing my legs to move through the mud and water, slipping and scrambling, feeling cold fingers brush my jacket, hearing the wet slap of feet chasing after me. Somehow, through sheer blind panic, I made it off the bridge and into the woods that bordered the river, crashing through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my face and hands, rain blinding me, the howling wind screaming like 1,000 angry voices in my ears. I didn't stop running until I burst through the trees and into the parking lot of the abandoned diner on Route 6, collapsing against the side of the building and retching into the puddles at my feet. When I finally dared to look back, the bridge was still visible through the trees, but the figures were gone, melted back into the mist and rain as if they had never been there at all, and I might have convinced myself it was all some hallucination, brought on by exhaustion and terror, if not for what I found the next morning. The rain finally stopped just before dawn, leaving the town eerily quiet, the streets littered with broken branches and debris. I staggered home in a daze and locked my doors, but sleep wouldn't come, so I sat by the window, watching the grey light creep across the sky, and that's when I saw it. A line of muddy footprints leading from the front door of my house, across the porch, and back down the street toward the river, each step sunken deep into the soft earth, as if whatever had made them had been impossibly heavy. And worse, mixed among the human prints were others, strange and twisted, as if someone had tried to imitate a foot but gotten it wrong. The toes too long, the heel misshapen, the whole thing off in a way that made my skin crawl. I wasn't the only one who saw them. All over town, people found footprints leading up to their houses, to their barns, even to the school. And every place the prints appeared, someone went missing. It was as if the rain had marked them, claimed them, and now that it had stopped, the things that lived beneath the river were coming to collect. The town council tried to organize a resistance, boarding up windows, posting armed patrols, but it didn't matter. By the end of the week, Greystone was a ghost town, the streets empty, the buildings abandoned, and the river, now calm and clear, whispered its secrets to no one. I left too, eventually, after weeks of hiding and waiting and listening to the whispers at my door, but even now, hundreds of miles away, I can't escape it. Every time it rains, no matter where I am, I hear them, footsteps squelching in the mud outside my window, soft, wet knocks at my door, voices calling my name in the middle of the night. And sometimes, just before I wake, I dream of standing on Old Creek Bridge, staring down into the water, and seeing my own reflection reach up to drag me under. And I know, deep down, that one day, when the rain returns, I won't be able to resist the call. The flyer showed up in my mailbox on the first day of spring, printed on thick, glossy paper that smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and something sweeter, something wrong. It was an invitation, simple and bright, advertising the first annual Greybriar Spring Festival, with promises of carnival rides, food trucks, games, prizes, and a fireworks show to cap off the night. But here's the thing. There was no town called Greybriar anywhere near where I lived, not on any map, not in any old local lore, not even as a ghost town. And yet there it was, complete with an address and a cheerful note that read, "Come, celebrate the season of renewal with us, fun for the whole family," in big looping letters that made my stomach twist the longer I stared at them. I should have thrown it away right then and there, should have ignored it like I would any junk mail or scam, but something about it, the vivid green of the paper, the almost tangible hum of invitation, lodged itself in my mind like a splinter. And by the next Saturday, I found myself driving down back roads I didn't recognize, past fields of nodding wildflowers that seemed just a little too bright, under a sky that looked too clean, too perfect, like a backdrop painted by someone who had never actually seen the real thing. I told myself I was just curious, that it would be a laugh, a weird story to tell later, but deep down I think I knew even then that I wasn't going there by choice. I nearly missed the turnoff, a narrow dirt path almost completely hidden by overgrown hedges. But as soon as my tires crunched over the gravel, my GPS blinked out, the radio turned to static, and a sharp, coppery smell filled the car, thick enough to make my eyes water. So ahead, through the trees, I could see it. The festival grounds sprawling out in a wide clearing, filled with colorful tents and rides that spun lazily against the pale spring sky, and crowds of people milling about in the distance. But something about them was off. Even from far away, their movements too jerky, their laughter too loud and brittle, like a badly looped recording. I should have turned around. I should have left. But instead I parked at the edge of the lot, if you could call a patch of churned up mud and broken glass a lot, and stepped out into the warm, humming air, immediately hit by a wall of sound. Calliope music, laughter, the creak of metal. Rides, and underneath it all, a low, almost subsonic hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Nobody greeted me as I walked toward the entrance, a rusted archway covered in plastic flowers, and no one asked for a ticket. The crowd flowed around me without ever quite touching me, faces half glimpsed. Blank-eyed men in suspenders, women with bright lipstick frozen in too wide smiles, children who moved in stilted, mechanical ways. And every time I thought, I recognized someone, a neighbor or a co-worker, the details would shift the second I looked away, leaving only a gnawing sense of wrongness in their place. I wandered past booths, hawking strange, glistening candies and prizes that seemed to pulse, when I wasn't looking directly at them, past games where you could throw rings onto bottles that whispered as you passed, past rides that spun so fast, the riders blurred into formless shapes, and everywhere the air smelled sweet, too sweet, like rotting fruit just starting to ferment. I told myself I'd just look around for a few minutes, maybe take a picture or two for proof and then leave. But when I checked my phone, the screen was dead, black and cold in my hand, despite the warm air. And when I turned back toward the parking lot, the path was gone, swallowed by the shifting maze of tents and rides. That's when I heard the announcement over the loudspeakers. The main event is about to begin. All guests please proceed to the Ferris wheel. The voice was syrupy and cheerful, but there was an undertone to it, a sharpness that made my skin crawl, and before I could decide whether to listen, the crowd around me surged forward, sweeping, me along with them toward the center of the festival grounds, where the Ferris wheel towered, skeletal and rusted against the sky. It was massive, at least twice the size of any Ferris wheel I'd ever seen, its cars hanging like cages, swaying slightly in the breeze. The operator, a tall man in a pinstripe suit with skin the color of old wax, stood at the base waving people forward with a wide, brittle grin that didn't touch his flat, staring eyes. And one by one, the festival goers climbed into the cars, disappearing inside as the wheels slowly groaned to life. When it was my turn, the operator's hand shot out and gripped my wrist, his fingers cold and damp, and he leaned in so close I could smell the sickly sweet rot on his breath, as he whispered, "No getting off until the end now," before shoving me into an open car and slamming the door shut behind me. The car lurched upward, swaying dangerously as it climbed, and as I rose above the festival, I saw, really saw, what lay beyond the clearing. Not more forest, not the road I had driven in on, but endless fields of writhing, pulsing flowers, their petals red and slick as raw meat, stretching to the horizon in every direction, and something moving through them, massive and slow too, large to comprehend, its body a shifting mass of vines and thorns and glistening eyes. The Ferris wheel turned faster and faster, the festival below becoming a blur of sickly colors and twisted shapes, and the other cars, the ones that had held people, were empty now, their doors swinging open, flapping in the rising wind. I screamed, pounding on the glass, but no one looked up, no one cared. And as the wheel reached its apex, something rose from the sea of meat flowers below, a yawning maw lined with endless rows of thorns, and I realized with bone-deep certainty what the main event really was. The wheel shuddered violently. The car door sprang open and I was pitched forward, falling into that gaping mouth, the festival music rising to a shrill, triumphant crescendo. And then everything went black. I didn't hit the ground, at least not the way I expected to. Instead, I landed hard on something wet and soft that squelched unpleasantly under my weight, and when I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on a carpet of petals the color of fresh blood, each one the size of my hand, slick and pulsing like a living thing. The air was thicker down here, humid and metallic, and the sky above was no longer the pale spring blue but a deep, bruised purple, swirling with clouds that moved against the wind, and the Ferris wheel, if it was even still the same wheel, loomed overhead, a broken skeleton creaking and groaning as it slowly dissolved into the roiling mass of flowers. All around me, other figures were scattered across the petals, dazed and struggling to stand. The other festival goers, the ones who had been on the rides, playing the games, eating the strange food, but something had changed in them. Their eyes were empty, their mouths slack, and when they moved it was with the clumsy, jerky gait of marionettes, pulled by invisible strings. A woman near me, her sundress shredded and stained dark, lurched upright and let out a low, gurgling moan, and from somewhere deeper in the field an answering chorus rose. Hundreds of voices merging into a single awful sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I scrambled to my feet, slipping and sliding on the fleshy petals, and tried to move away from the gathering horde, but the flowers clung to my shoes, wrapping thin tendrils around my ankles, trying to pull me down. In the distance I could see the edge of the field, where the flowers gave way to a dense wall of black, twisted trees. And beyond that maybe, a road, a way out. But between me and freedom was a sea of broken people shuffling aimlessly, their faces blank and wrong, their hands twitching and reaching blindly. Something massive stirred beneath the petals, sending ripples through the field, and I knew with a sick certainty that whatever had swallowed the Ferris wheel was still down, there watching, waiting. I had no plan, no idea what to do except run, so I tore myself free from the clutching vines and sprinted toward the trees, weaving between the shambling figures, ducking under grasping hands, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. As I ran, I caught glimpses of things, booths from the festival half sunk into the petals, their prizes twitching and pulsing as if alive. The food trucks overturned and covered in a thick grey mold that oozed and bubbled. Rides twisted into monstrous shapes, their metal frames writhing like worms in the earth. And all the while, that low hum vibrated through the ground, growing, louder and deeper, until it felt like it was inside my skull, rattling my teeth, making my vision blur. By the time I reached the trees, my legs were trembling, and my lungs felt like they were on fire. But I didn't dare stop. The forest was no safer. The trees were wrong, their bark slick and glistening, their branches twitching like antennae. But at least there was cover, places to hide, and the things in the field didn't seem to want to follow me into the shadows. I plunged into the darkness, the petals giving way to a thick carpet of black moss that squelched underfoot, and stumbled blindly forward, branches tearing at my clothes and skin, the air growing colder and heavier with every step. Behind me I could still hear the festival, the music warped and distant, the screams sharper and closer, and something huge crashing through the trees in pursuit. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Later I stumbled onto an overgrown path, a thin ribbon of cracked asphalt that wound between the trees like a vein, and for the first time I felt a flicker of hope. I turned left, following the path as it sloped downward, and after what felt like an eternity, I saw lights through the trees, headlights maybe, or the glow of a town. But as I ran toward them, the trees thinned, and I realized with mounting horror that it wasn't a town waiting for me. It was the festival grounds, perfectly intact, the Ferris wheel spinning lazily against the purple sky, the booths bustling with fresh-faced revelers, the air filled with the same sickly sweet, a scent of rotting flowers I had never left. I couldn't leave. Somewhere behind me the trees shifted, and I turned just in time to see the figure step out from the shadows, the carnival operator, his pinstripe suit immaculate, his waxy face split by a wide, gleaming smile. He raised one hand and beckoned, and even though every fiber of my being screamed to run, My feet moved on their own, dragging me back toward the lights, back toward the music, back into the nightmare. The crowd swallowed me again, their faces bright and eager, their hands warm and insistent, and somewhere high above the Ferris wheel creaked and turned, each car now filled with something that writhed and shuddered and bled. I understood then. The festival wasn't just a trap. It was a cycle, a blooming, a harvest, a feast, and spring had only just begun.